Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Harlem Speaks. My name is Christian McBride, and I'm the co-director of the National Jazz Museum in Harlem. And it is indeed a pleasure tonight to interview who all of us would consider a living legend. And I don't say that lightly. Many of you sitting in the audience tonight know who this man is. Before I give him the official introduction, I want to say a few words about him. The producer. There's an image of the producer that has maintained over the years a cocky, obnoxious, sunglass wearing, I know more than the musicians sort of attitude. One who sometimes can take his job a little too seriously. Meanwhile, it's the musicians in there kind of doing the work. In that sense, this man has represented the anti-producer because he is definitely one of the cats. Unanimously loved by every musician who's ever worked with him. And you'd be hard-pressed to find musicians who unanimously like a producer. But this man has done the impossible, and he has gained the love of every musician he's ever worked with. I want to say the first time I worked with him, to me, it was a very critical point of my early career, because I didn't realize what a real, pro record date was like. I had been on a few records by the time I had a chance to work with this man, but it was all small combo dates. Session would be called at noon. You probably would start working on the first song about 12:30, quarter to 1, and very loose, very fruitful, but loose. I got called to do a recording with David Sanborn in 1994 called Pearls. And I found out this man was the producer. Johnny Mandel was conducting and arranging. I get to the studio, and there's a full symphony orchestra. There's Don Grolnick playing keyboards. There's Steve Gadd playing drums. Bucky Pizzarelli playing guitar. And that's when I went, oh, this is the major leagues here. This is the deal. That clock struck 12 o'clock. Johnny Mandel was looking at the clock just like this. At 12 o'clock, his baton came down. And I went, wow, this is heavy. So this man was also my introduction to the real professional world of recording, how the bigwigs do it. I would like to introduce to you one of the great men of our time, Mr. Tommy LiPuma. Tommy LiPuma. I call him Sir Thomas, and he deserves that respect. Thanks for joining us, Tommy.
My pleasure.
The question that I tried real hard to think of questions that you don't get all the time, but I think I may have to start with the most basic question you probably get all the time. What is a producer?
Well, I think the best way to explain it would be it's sort of like a director of a film, in the sense that, you try to cast the right musicians to the artist, to the material that you're going to be doing, and basically just move things along as best you can. And I think that, look, there's so many different types of ways of a producer working. I mean, some producers are also arrangers. Some producers are musicians. Now, I was a musician. The reason I'm saying is, I hadn't played professionally since 1961. And then there are producers, though, that actually don't have any sort of musical background other than the love of music. And I think it's just everyone has their own style, and with me, I think, the song is probably of utmost importance to me. I mean, I think that, without material, you just, I don't care how good the musicians are or how well, how good the artist is.
Yeah.
If the material isn't there, it's not going to happen. But to get sort of simplistic about it, I try to get the best material that I can get. I try to do as much pre-production as possible, meaning that I try to sit down with the artist and maybe I'll have the keyboard player come in, or if in Diana Krall's case, obviously she's the keyboard player, so we'll sit and we'll spend maybe, I don't know, days just going through material, and maybe we'll start with 40 or 50 songs to end up with 15, of which maybe we'll end up doing 13 or 14,
right.
But it's just and what I mean by starting with 40 or 50 and knocking it down, it's like sitting with the artist and listening to them, whether they're being accompanied by another keyboard player or if they're able to accompany themselves, and listening to how they sound doing the song, whether it's a natural feeling for them or it isn't, and sometimes it's very obvious to both the producer and the artist. Oh yeah, this one is great, and this one maybe we should just pass on that one. And then sometimes you have to coax the artist a bit as to saying, look, you really sound great on it, because it's obviously an artist. I think it's difficult for them to be as objective. They're much more subjective, obviously, and sometimes they're looking for certain things and not looking at the big picture. And I think that's another thing as far as producers are concerned.
Right.
It's important to be looking at the big picture. Like things like tempo. As Christian, I'm sure, could tell you, I'm really a stickler on tempos, because I think you can lose a take, you can lose a song on if the tempo is just a few
Right.
points one way or the other. So it's a combination of the tempo and just the feel, and you just sort of know, everybody sort of knows when it's the take. And musicians of Christian's caliber, and I don't know whether or not Christian ever heard this, but usually what I do is the first person I put the call into is Christian. I find out when he's available, and then I call everybody else, But it's that, to have that caliber.
I tipped him for that.
But when you have that caliber of musician, and you have great songs, and you of course have an artist with talent, I mean, I don't want to make it as simple sounding as to say you just get out of the way, because obviously it's not that simple. But you try to. There's this moment where everyone's sort of learning the tune or getting a sense of where it should be going, and when it starts happening, obviously I've got a great engineer by the name of Al Schmidt I've been working with for 35 or so years. He's ready, and I'll give him the high sign, and I want, well, it doesn't go like this anymore, but I want I want that machine going,
Right.
because you want to catch those first moments, because great musicians, after doing 3, 4, 5 takes, it gets boring. You have to catch that.
Yeah.
You have to catch that moment, and I refer to it as magic. When everything just seems to be on that level.
And it's always in those early takes, right?
It's always in the early takes.
Yeah.
And sometimes an artist will, because they're listening to a specific thing, like if they didn't get it quite right in a particular part of the verse or whatever, they'll say, oh, let's take one more, because I don't like the way I did the bridge, and they're talking about their performance.
Right.
And I never resist them from doing another take, but I'll make a mental note that particular take
Right.
was great.
Right.
And or I'll say, look, you didn't like the way you did the bridge. Well, we can always punch in, meaning we can always re-record a line or
Right,
do a particular part over if the overall thing is happening.
It's great. Yeah, yeah. Now I have a question for you. What happens in those situations when you take a very headstrong artist that knows exactly what they want, exactly how they want it? You don't suggest to them, they suggest to you. Now, I've seen you work under those conditions, and I find that what I've always admired most about you, you're a master of personalities, because you know how to tame a lot of beasts, and you know how to build.
I can think of one I couldn't tame, but we'll leave that anonymous.
That'd be off the record, right? And artists who maybe aren't quite so sure about what they're doing, you can pull the confidence out. You know, you can build them up with some confidence. But particularly with real headstrong artists, what would you say is your formula for that?
Diplomacy.
Yeah.
It's really important to there's no way that, I mean, I don't think you can, maybe in the 20s and the 30s in the movie business, you had tyrants who can, just sort of like intimidate
Right.
actors or actresses into doing a performance. But one, that's not my style. And I think the best thing to do is to let them do what they think they should do, and then you sit back and you listen to what it is that you did, and at that point you can make point out a few things that maybe isn't quite what it should be, or basically how it should be done.
Right.
But usually the overall arrangement or the overall manner in which you're going to do it, we usually work that out. Well,
Right.
there's a combination of like somebody, an artist like Diana, she'll go in with a particular idea. She's really great at figuring out what's best for her as far as the arrangement is concerned.
Yeah.
And sometimes though, when we get in there and we start trying, it doesn't quite come off sounding when you listen back to it the way she had it in mind, and she's obviously open enough to say, well, wait, that's not working quite right. But in regards to a headstrong artist, you really just have to be very diplomatic. And we just worked. Diana and I actually both co-produced the last Streisand album, and
She
talk
needs
about
a lot of
headstrong.
confidence boosting, right?
But it's really you really have it tries your patience. But I must say that with all due respect, she knows what she wants, and you have to respect that. I mean, you can't just make off like the bitch is crazy and I'm not. You just have to like go with it.
Yeah. We mentioned Orrin Keepnews while we were backstage, and he was named as a NEA Jazz Master earlier this year. And one thing I heard him say I thought was interesting on a video I saw quite some time ago is he talked about now with music education and college and all these different programs, there are classes on how to become a producer. And he said back in those days there were no classes or anyone to teach you how to become a producer. So how did that happen for you?
Well, I started. It's sort of a Horatio Alger story as I think about it, because I started. I was a musician, and I worked 3 or 4 nights a week. I grew up in Cleveland, and but I can't say it's a mistake, because obviously everything turned out okay. But I made the mistake of quitting school in the 10th grade. I couldn't deal with it, and my father, being immigrant, Italian immigrant, barber, just said, with his broken English, he said, you don't want to go to school, you have to learn a trade. So of course he was a barber. Next thing I know, I was a barber. Hated it with every inch of muscle in my body. I hated it. And, you know, it was only the music that, you know, I had 3 or 4 nights a week I'd work that kept me going. And I, just as fate would have it, a friend of mine said, hey, there's a barber shop downtown. This was in Cleveland, the Playhouse Square area of Cleveland. And there was a barber shop that was in a big building, a professional building, with doctors and lawyers, and that was for sale. So to make a long story short, I ended up buying the shop. And as it turns out, because it was in this center where everything is going on in Cleveland, all of the radio stations were on it. Next thing I know, I started getting disc jockeys, guys who worked at you know, in those days they had independent distribution,
Right.
guys who worked at distributors, and they started becoming customers. And, you know, I hear the whole, you know, deal as
inside
far as
scoop.
the
Yeah.
inside scoop, and I say, man, this sounds like something that could be fun. So I'm cutting their hair, and I'd say, you know, you think, you know, you could find a place for me? And they said, no, you don't want to do that, man. It's just, but thank God, one guy took me seriously. But what happened was, by that time, I was so sick of the trade that I'd got a chance to go on the road with a band. So I leased my shop out. I went out on the road. I was on the road for about a year. And I mean, we played every toilet known to man. Fargo, North Dakota, Minot, Mishawaka, Indiana. I mean, like, just it's unbelievable.
Now,
So
you were playing saxophone,
I was a
right?
saxophone player,
Yeah.
yeah. And I was with this group, and we used to do 4-part harmony things like the Four Freshmen, and I sang all the falsetto parts. But you know, after a while, I just said, "Look, man, this ain't happening." And so I came back. I couldn't go back to my barber shop because I had leased it out.
Yeah.
So there was someone across the street, and he heard I was back in town. He offers me a job. So I take the job. I lasted 1 day, and I just said, "Man, this is not it." I said, "Look, Joe, I'm sorry. I just can't do this." I quit. I go home. My father said, "How much are you making today?" I said, "I quit." He flipped. He couldn't believe it. Well, again, as fate would have it, within 2 weeks, this guy, who was a customer of mine, called me. He had just taken over management of a record distributor in Cleveland. It was a big distributor. They were also in Chicago. It's called MS Distributing. And they had like every line, you know, Mercury, Verve, every line known to man. So I started packing records at $50 a week. I was just packing orders, but it was a great place to start because
Wow.
you got a sense, you know, in those days, radio was everything. So, you know, it's something to get it on radio. Next thing you know, these orders would start coming in, and you'd have
Yeah.
to pack these orders.
Yeah.
And I did that for about, I don't know, 2 or 3 months, and then a job in record promotion opened up. And I started promoting records, and I did really well at that. And somebody in LA heard about me, hired me as the local guy for LA. I went out, started there, and I went to my first recording date, and it was Gene McDaniel's.
Oh yeah. Wow.
And I was just, and this is the most unbelievable thing. I look over and the second engineer, I say, man, that cab looks familiar. Well, it was not Bill Holman, but Bill Perkins.
Wow.
Bill Perkins, man, is one of my tenor saxophone heroes, you know.
Wow.
And he was the second
Second engineer. Wow.
Well, he ended up on the Tonight Show. He was one of the
Right,
Tonight Show.
right.
But at the time, that's what he was doing. But I was so taken by the whole studio thing. I said, man, I got to do this. So I just, for the next 2 years, I just worked my ass off as a promotion man. They sent me to New York. I was in New York for a year promoting records. And I told them, I said, the first gig that opens in publishing, because I thought publishing would be a way in, you know, I want. So they ended up, I worked for a company called Liberty Records, and they had bought Imperial Records. Now, my first gig was to go through all of the tapes. There was a guy by the name of Lou Chudd who owned Imperial Records. Now, Imperial Records was Fats Domino, Irma Thomas, Sandy Nelson, the only But my job was to go through tapes just to see what the what the material was. Well, man, I was finding all of these outrageous songs by the Neville Brothers, and I thought, man, I'm getting paid for this. You know, I'm sitting here listening to all of these great songs, and then, as it turns out, the OJs were part of Imperial.
Who were from Cleveland.
From Cleveland. So we were, of course, homeboys, and we, really got off and everything. And as it turns out, the guy at Liberty gave me a shot at producing, and the first record I produced was with the OJs. And it was a Benny Spellman record called Lipstick Traces. And Aaron Neville actually had written it.
Wow.
And as it turns out, it was a hit. It was like what they used to call a regional hit. It was a
regional hit, right?
In Detroit, in Chicago.
Right.
And as it turns out, I had been friends with Herb Alpert and Jerry Moss, who had just started A&M. Well, they started A&M actually in '62. And I had been friends with them for a long time. And they had just gotten to the point where they were doing really well. But Herb hadn't busted wide open at the time. But they asked me to join them. This was like October '65.
Wow.
And I joined them as a A&R guy. And in those days, staff producers, you would just they'd sign guys and you would just do what they gave you,
Right.
Like my friend Al Schmidt, who turned out to be my engineer. When I first met him, I was a song plugger when I was in the publishing field. And he was producing Eddie Fisher.
Now, how many staff producers would a company like A&M have
Well,
at that time?
that was, there were only 5 of us.
Right.
There were five people in all, and I was the first staff guy.
Wow.
So they signed this group that was fairly lame, but they were able to sing phonetically in 5 languages. So it turns out they had been part of this group, this thing called the Mitchell Boys Choir. It was pretty lame. Anyway, it turns out I came up with this song that I thought, hey, man, this is a great song. They could sing in Spanish. So I did this record. It was Guantanamera. And that was my first hit. But then I was going, oh shit, now I got to do another record with these guys, man.
Right.
But I was there until '68 or '69. I had a friend who started a record company called Blue Thumb, and
ABC, right?
Well, it was actually ABC ended up with it, but at the
Right.
time we had just started. We had Captain Beefheart, we had the Pointer Sisters, we had
Wow.
the Jazz Crusaders. They used to
Right,
call them the
right,
Jazz
right.
Crusaders then, and I mean we never we practically went broke. That's why ABC bought us.
Right.
Because we couldn't, because in those days, the worst thing that an independent company, a small independent company could do is have a hit record, because the next thing you know, you were getting bills for, pressing from pressing plants for things that they were pressing
Wow.
up. And meanwhile, distributors weren't paying you. You'd have to have 2 or 3 successful records in order for an independent
Right,
distributor to start
right.
paying you money. So, but it was great. It was fun. I really cut my teeth, and prior to that, I mean, let's say when I started, because you had asked, how you started, in complete terror. The first few things I produced,
Yeah.
it was like, I was just playing it by ear,
Yeah.
and made a lot of mistakes, and that's,
Sure.
I learned from my mistakes.
Yeah. Well, Tommy, one thing that's so great about you, which I think a lot of the musicians respect, is hearing your background. You got some serious street hustle in you, man. and that really, seriously, that goes into how you communicate and interact with people, and you understand where the musicians are coming from, you having been a saxophone player, being on the road. But I love the story you told me about the first time you met Dinah Washington, or the first time you spoke to her on the phone.
Yeah.
And don't worry, it's okay, you can curse.
This is when I was a promotion man in Cleveland, and one of the lines we had was Mercury, and Dinah Washington was on Mercury, and she had just done this album called Tears and Laughter, and what was really interesting about this, I didn't find this out until later, that what was the group from Philadelphia who ended up becoming, big, but they used to sing like the Hi-Los. They used to sing like the Hi-Los, man.
Oh man, that could have been anybody's. Stylistics, maybe?
No,
Delphonics?
Delphonics.
Yeah.
Okay, so it turns out that there was one cut on this album that she did with this group that sounded like the Hi-Los. I'm saying, who is this? Because they didn't get many credit
Right.
or anything. So in the meantime, I call the guy that was running Barney Fields, his name was, who was head of promotion in Chicago. They used to be on Wacker Drive in Chicago. And I said, Barney, I love Dinah Washington. I'm a big fan of Dinah Washington. She's working this club downtown. We just got this album. I'd love to, get together and take her around to some of the radio stations. So he said, well, let me see if I can get that, because in those days, it was, a lot of these acts could not get in hotels. So they used to stay with friends and whatnot. So they had to figure out where she was staying. I got this
Right.
telephone number. I called, somebody answered the phone. I said, is Dinah Washington there? She said, who is this? I said, this is Tommy LiPuma with MS Distributing. I've got Mercury Records. So I heard this, talk going on, and she had the phone covered. Next thing I know, somebody says, hello. And I said, Miss Washington? She said, yeah. I said, this is Tommy LiPuma with Mercury Records. She said, yeah. I said, I'm a big fan. I go through all of that shit, and I said, we've got this new album, which is great, and I'd love to take you around to the radio stations. And there was a slight pause, and she said, honey, I don't do that shit. That was it, So that night I went to see her at the club, and she was sitting at the bar, and I went up to say hello, and somebody introduced me. They said, this is Tommy LiPuma with Mercury Records. Now, it could very well be she was probably pissed off at Mercury at the time. 'Cause
Yeah,
I think she
sure.
left, within a year she left and went with Roulette.
Wow.
But the amazing thing is, man, I think she was 38 when she died.
Right.
And man, she definitely lived
Hard life.
all those 38 years and more.
Right.
She didn't look 38, I can tell you that.
Yeah. I didn't realize, well, I did realize this actually, but when you talked about Blue Thumb, I know one of your dearest and closest friends is Joe Sample.
Yep.
And I've had a great pleasure of working with you and Joe on a lot of projects together, but looking at your roster and all the people you've worked with through the years, Natalie Cole, George Benson, Al Jarreau, Miles Davis, Diana Krall, Anita Baker, and I've heard you tell some great stories about all of them. When we were in Cleveland, I think this must have been in 2004, when they gave you the big tribute at the Tri-C Festival, George Benson tells this great story. Was it when he got his first advance from Warner Brothers? Is that what it was? He got paid in cash or something? I would just love to throw a few names at you and you tell us some tidbits about these people, because you were right there when George went from being the top jazz guitar player in the world to being a huge pop star. You were right there in the middle of that storm. So how did all that go down?
Well, it's really interesting because around 1973, I was still at Blue Thumb, and I was in San Francisco. I was doing this group called Dan Hicks and the Hot Licks. Really a great group, by the way. They were really great. And so I was working in Sausalito at the record plant. And Al Schmidt, who was my buddy, and we didn't start working at that point as engineer and producer. he was producing the Jefferson Airplane.
Right.
And he
right.
was working on the other side. He was working in San Francisco. So we had decided, hey, that night we were going to go have dinner together. So when I was finished, I, went over the bridge, came over the bridge, and we met somewhere. We had dinner, and on the way back to the hotel, because we were sharing a suite at the Miyako, which was a hotel that was off the beaten path. But in any event, on the way back, we happened to go by just by accident. We went by the Keystone Corner, which was
Right.
who
Todd Barkin ran that place. Yeah.
Todd owned it, yeah.
Yeah.
And up it said George Benson on it. And I said, stop the cab, man. We got to go. We have to check this out. So we went in, and George, believe it or not, was just setting up. He actually was taking his amp out, setting it up on the stage.
Yeah.
And the first song he did was Summertime. He sang Summertime. Now, some way or other, man, I missed Benson Burner, which was on Columbia.
Columbia, right.
And he had done Summertime on that. I missed that, and for some reason or other, I missed the other side of Abbey Road, Here Comes the Sun.
Right.
It was the only two vocals that he had done. So I was just taken by surprise, because I loved him, man. I had all of the records, but for some reason or other, those two things evaded me. So I was like blown away. I said, shit, this guy can sing, And so, as it turns out, 3 years later, my ex-partner at Blue Thumb had come over to Warner's. He called me. He said, hey, man, I got a match made in heaven. He said, George Benson's contract's coming up. I got a chance to sign him. Would you like to do it? I said, are you kidding, man? So we got together for our meeting, and the first thing I said, after we, shook hands and said a few things and whatnot, I said, how come you've never, sang on your records? And then he told me, well, I did, a few things. He said, but Creed Taylor, he said, Creed was, basically wanted to make me the next Wes Montgomery,
right.
And he didn't want me to sing. And then I told him the story. I said, man, I saw you sing at Keystone Quarter a few years ago, and I thought you were great, and blah, blah, blah. Okay, so we get together, and at the time I told him, I said, look, George, if we find the right tune, we'll try a vocal, but let's not make it, that we've got to do it,
right.
whatever. We'll come up with tunes and whatnot, which we did, and then I had a great rhythm section. It was like Harvey Mason and
right.
Ralph McDonald. I brought Ralph out, and Phil Upchurch.
Yeah, yeah.
So and then I had Bobby Womack. I had done some stuff with, so I had Bobby come down.
Bobby's that's the
which is
man.
a trip. So, but as it turns out, I didn't find this tune, but it was on a Leon Russell album called Carney, and it was This Masquerade. But the way Leon had done it, it was so difficult to really get a sense as to how good the song was, because what he was trying to do was make off like he was talking to some chick on the phone, and he had put his voice through this graphic equalizer to make it sound like he was on the phone. And the song didn't completely get to me until when we signed David Sanborn to Warner Brothers. His demo was This Masquerade,
wow.
done instrumentally, of course. And I remember the guy that was managing him at the time, John Court. I said, man, this song sounds familiar. Where do I know this song from? He said, well, this is Leon Russell, This Masquerade. God damn, it's good. So I went back and I got it. So I suggested it, and he loved it. And we did it. Well, as it turns out, jump to a year later, after we'd done the album, and the album was sold millions of records. And it was Mo Austin's 50th birthday, and we were having a drink at the bar. And he looked at me, he said, brother, he said, you probably don't remember this. He said, but when I first got together with you, you asked me why you don't sing more on your records. And I knew right then I wanted you as my producer. So it's sometimes like something you say that you don't even realize makes the difference between,
Yeah, that's very true. Out of all of the many classic albums you have produced. One huge success was Natalie Cole's Unforgettable. That pretty much, I mean, she was already a superstar, but then that even made her career even much more successful than it already had been. But I remember the controversy between her singing a duet with her father.
Big.
I remember.
I think Saturday Night Live, in fact, did a takeoff on it.
Right, right. Didn't she like sing along with the video on the Grammys or something like that?
Well, actually, you know, what happened was, another one of these great stories where she was with EMI, she was with Capitol, and she just, you know, that it just wasn't happening. So they gave her a release. I get a call from my very close friend, and he was chairman of Elektra Records at the time, Bob Krasnow, great record guy. And he said, look, he said, I got a chance to sign Natalie Cole. What do you think? Well, as it turns out, I had just heard 2 weeks before that there was a video she had done on Pink Cadillac.
Oh yeah, right.
And she sang her ass off.
Right.
I said, man, this girl, because I wasn't really that aware of just how great this woman was until I heard this version of Pink Cadillac, and I said, man, look, she's great, man, she's great. Yeah, let's get together. And then I said to him, I said, you know, man, we should do an album of all of her father's things. So he said, hey, that sounds like a great idea. We'll bring it up to her. So as it turns out, Bob Krasnow had a hip operation, so we had to have the meeting at the hospital, right there, Mount Sinai.
Mount Sinai, yeah.
And so we brought up the idea, and she said, you know, I've been wanting to do this for years. She said, and Capitol just wasn't interested, you know. She said, you know, I'd love to do it. She said, but she said, I don't know if I want to do it for the first album. She said, you know, I'd like to do another album, and then we can do this album. And I said to her, I said, you know, look, this is only my opinion, but ideas are like viruses. You just, you know, you say something to someone, and the next thing you know, Johnny Mathis does it, or George Benson, you know, does it. And whether or not it would be a hit or not, that's not even the case. If it's done, it takes the edge off of the idea,
Right,
you know?
right.
So she, you know, she understood what I said, and she agreed, you know, that we were going to do it. But we decided we were going to do 24 or 25 things.
Yeah.
And there was no way for me to do 25 things. It was just too much. So we brought in David Foster.
Yeah.
And then she was married at the time to Andre Fisher.
Andre Fisher,
so Andre
right.
did some stuff. But it was her idea. She said, you know, I do this thing at the end of my show. I got some footage of my father, and she said, I got a tape from Capitol, and a 3-track tape, and I took my father's voice out, except in spots that I want him to sing. And she said, this is how I close the show. And
So she had already been doing that.
she had been doing it.
Okay.
Yeah. But then she said, you know, so I, you know, it's great. I said, yeah. She said, I'd like to close the album with it. I said, perfect, great.
Yeah.
So that's how it was. It basically was the 24th track on the album. But the minute it came out, man, it was like everybody just
it was
jumped on
huge,
that.
huge.
And between, I'm telling you, man, I never saw a record break that fast.
Yeah.
It was like 2 weeks, 3 weeks, man, and it was
number one.
It was, yeah.
Yeah. Now, was it surprising or maybe disappointing when you discovered how much controversy was being kicked up because of, you know, well, she's singing with her dad, and that's weird, and
I didn't. First of all, if you know, did anybody think about listening to the other 23 cuts?
Right.
It's like basically it was just the last cut. You know, it wasn't like we asked them to release it as a single. It was such a demand for it that the company, smartly enough, said, yeah, you know, let's release it as a single.
Yeah.
But it was only when we got to the second album, and a few people at the company said, well, you know, what are you going to do? What duet are you going to do now? I said, no duets. I said, this is a one-trick pony, you know, you just,
Right.
I'm not going to do it twice. And a lot of them, they put a beef about it. Oh man, we got to have another. I said, no, you can't do that. Then it becomes a novelty.
A novelty, right. And I would think, you know, Natalie Cole singing with her dad, that's special.
Well,
you
yeah,
know what I mean? That's
it's her own man. You know, it's not like
different from Kenny G and
Louis Armstrong, man.
Yeah, right.
That was another one, man. I had it.
Don't say that.
Yeah, believe it or not, I got a call from some. The names will remain anonymous. As it turns out, Universal, who owns Verve, owns that song, "What a Wonderful World."
Yeah.
And I got a call from somebody saying that Kenny G wanted to, lease the rights to it, and he said to me, well, you know, what do you think? And I said, well, you know, so and so, whatever his name was. I said, what do you make on this a year? You know, how many? What does it sell? Well, as it turns out, every year they average $500,000 to $750,000 just on that one cut. And I said, man, why do you want to fuck with something that's so great? And you know, well, he wants to give us I guess he offered him $250,000 or something.
Right.
But I thought it was a bad idea, but they did it anyway.
Yeah. Well, see, you know, when you tell these stories and reveal your integrity, it seems to me so surprising that you've lasted in this business without killing someone. Because as you well know, you know, like when you have a hit like that with Unforgettable, you know, and then the proverbial company men want you to keep doing it over and over again, and you know, for you to say, hey, no, that was a special thing. You know, you've always had very high artistic standards.
You know, actually, I was very lucky because I can remember Jerry Wexler, who everyone may know or not know, but Jerry Wexler was one of the owners of Atlantic Records.
Yeah.
And Jerry was a character of the first order, but he was very intelligent, and he really knew his music, particularly rhythm and blues. I think they say that he came up with the expression.
Phrase, yeah, wow.
So in any event, we were talking once, and I don't know, whatever, I was commiserating about something. And he said to me, he said, Tommy, he said, you got to make sure that you have your own rabbi at a record company. And basically he meant you had to have somebody there who believed in you, who was like your rabbi, who you can go to, and I, as I thought back, and I realized that I always had a rabbi. I always had someone, if it was, you know, Jerry and Herb at A&M, Bob Krasnow at Blue Film, Bob Krasnow at Elektra, Mo Austin and Lenny Waronker at Warner Brothers, Zach Horwitz at Universal. Guys who believed in me and didn't just let me do what I did, whether they agreed or not. In fact, very interesting story, man. Mo Austin, who never bothered, to him, the A&R department, that's why Warner Brothers was so successful. The A&R department at Warner Brothers was hands off. Nobody was able to mess, whether it was the finance department or whoever. Nobody but Mo Austin could say anything about the A&R department. So we used to have these Monday afternoon lunches with this bad deli food from Jerry's Deli on Ventura Boulevard. This was in Burbank. And he'd go around the table, you know, and he'd ask what's going on. And this is the only time I ever got a sense, and I worked there 17 years, that I ever got a sense that he wasn't happy with who I was signing. He got to me and he said, Tommy, what's going on? I said, I'm signing Dr. John. And he said, oh yeah, what label is it going to be on?
Uh-oh.
So I said, oh. But it didn't deter me, and he didn't stop me.
Yeah.
And it turned out it was the record that had Ricky Lee Jones. I did Making Whoopee with he and Ricky.
Yeah.
It was called In a Sentimental Mood. So an Ellington tune that we did.
Yeah.
And it was a pretty good sized record. I mean, I think it sold about 500,000. So he never said, hey, he never copped to it, but he never told me not to do it.
Right. I'm sure he never said anything like that to you at another one of those Monday meetings either.
No.
Yeah.
But it's like that's you had to have trust,
Right.
guys. And it started. As you think about those days in the record business, the difference between the record business then and now, the biggest disaster that happened to the record business was corporations taking over the music business. There were two corporations, at the time, that basically had companies, Columbia and RCA. And I think they sort of just looked at it as this was something to have, it's not our big money maker, but it's important to have, a music division. And then they had guys like Goddard Lieberson, who was, head of Columbia, who was just a brilliant guy. And Chet Atkins at RCA.
Yeah.
But the reason for this is because in those days, with the exception of those two corporations, it was all owned by entrepreneurs, guys who just they went by their gut.
Yeah.
They signed acts by their gut, their instinct. Not that they didn't want to make a profit, but it wasn't like, they genuinely loved music, and they could do whatever they wanted to do. They didn't have a board or stockholders that they had to worry about. Today, what you have is, if you have a bad quarter, everybody starts going, oh, what do you got coming up? Well, we have to get something good. It's like they panic. The record business is not a quarterly business. There is no such thing anymore as artist development.
Right.
We used to have artist development departments where it was, you'd stick with an act for 3 or 4 or 5 albums.
Right.
That doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah. Artem, how are we doing on time?
We have 5 more minutes.
5 more minutes?
Yeah.
Well, no. He just has to stick in another tape. Staying on that subject for the next 5 minutes, when do you think that started happening? Like when the record business became strictly business?
The minute that corporations thought that the music business was a cash cow, which was probably, I don't know, sometime when when the CDs came out, which, by the way, the record companies fought.
Right.
They didn't want to go to CDs. It was actually Larry Rosen and Dave Grusin.
Right.
Believe it or not, GRP was the first record company that put out CDs.
I remember.
And that's why they were successful.
Right.
You
They
know.
would have those big stickers say digital.
Yeah, right.
Digital CD right on.
Right. And what ended up happening was, because at the time that the CD first came out, the hardware was really expensive. And then within a year or 2 years, it went down to just a few $100 for a CD player, and then everybody, of course, bought it.
Right.
And then they were looking for stuff.
Right.
And it was only then that record companies started getting a sense of demand. But I could remember I'd be sitting in meetings, and the sales guys would say, oh man, the retail stores, they're not going to want to go from a 12-inch box to a 7-inch box. And I mean, all this stupid reasons not to do it, not to change to the CD.
Right.
But when the CD came out, it was like an explosion. And the next thing you know, record companies were bringing in millions,
Right.
hundreds of millions of dollars. And then suddenly, Wall Street, boom, wait, that looks like, a business we should be getting into.
Yeah. So you would say like that must have been around the early '80s
Yeah.
when that started going down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'd say I'm trying to think if it was, who was the first company that went down. I'm wondering if it was. Gee, I don't know. Well, it wasn't Universal, but Universal went in like '90, and A&M was bought right around '90.
Right, right.
But it was like the mid '80s when the corporation
I
started.
remember Barry Gordy sold Motown.
Yeah, right.
Around that time.
But you know what? It's funny because he didn't sell the publishing.
Yeah, smart man.
Yeah, and Jerry and Herb
Right.
and A&M, they did the same thing. They sold the record company, but they didn't sell the publishing company.
Right, right. On that note, we're going to take a quick break and switch videotapes here, and then we're going to come back for some more with Tommy LiPuma.
Yeah.
Great, man. Thanks.
Oh, yeah, man.
That's lovely.
All right.
Passing it down.
And we're back with the great Tommy LiPuma. Tommy, as our tradition here, we always open up the floor for the last 20, 25 minutes or so. So we still have a few more minutes to talk before we open it up for questions. But two particular artists I wanted to ask you about and tell some stories about. Miles Davis and Anita Baker.
Wow.
You saw his reaction, folks. And then I have one last question about, what you. Well, we'll get to that in a second. But tell us about how you met Miles Davis and got to work with him.
Actually, it was at the time. This was like 1986, I believe. He was still married to Cicely Tyson, and Cicely was being handled, or at least her lawyer was this guy by the name of David Franklin. And I think basically, what I was able to get was that Miles just, I guess he was to the point where he was feeling like he was second fiddle at Sony, and he felt it was time for him to leave. So I guess he was able to get out of the deal because there was never any. I never heard any rumbles about him leaving Columbia or having a problem leaving Columbia. And so David called me, and I set up this meeting with Mo and Lenny Moriker. And actually what happened was I was in New York, so I set it up. They flew, they being David Franklin and Miles, flew to L.A. Miles could have been in L.A. He was living on both coasts at the time. But anyway, they got together, and then when Miles was back here, he got together with me. He came by my apartment, and we spent a couple hours together with him, and David Franklin was there. And I collect art, a certain period of American art, early 20th century American art. And of course, he was drawing.
All the way in it.
He'd sit and he'd constantly be drawing. And so he saw this art on the wall, and he flipped. He was looking at, he was doing that, and checking things out. And then I put some stuff on, some music, and see, the one thing I learned was, and I told him once, I said, man, you didn't miss your calling, but you could have been one of the great A&R guys. This guy had ears, like nobody. I mean, and he loved. I'll never forget. I played him, not necessarily to do, even though we ended up doing it, but I played him this. Oh man, of course now I went blank on the title of the song. But he freaked. I mean, he'd hear a pop song and he would just get it immediately, So we had this meeting and we hit it off. And I'll never forget, the last thing he did before he left the apartment is he grabbed me by the arms like this. He grabbed me and he looked, man. And when he looked at you,
Steely eyes.
Man, he had these eyes that would just pierce lead. And he just looked right into me like this, and just sort of give me the sense like you said, yeah, I guess I passed the test. He was cool. And I tell you, at that point, he was just the best. I caught him, man. I was lucky. I think I caught him. Obviously, it was toward the end of his career. I think he died about 4 or 5 years later, but he was just the best to work with. I never laughed so hard in my life as I did with Miles. I mean, I wish that I would have put a thing on my phone where I could have recorded some of these conversations, because he was just so, he would come up with stuff just like this that was just hilarious, I mean, Christian has heard some of these stories, and a few other people that I know in the audience probably heard it, but one of the first things he said to me that just had me on the floor was, he was telling me about he had the rehearsal earlier in the day, and at the time, Mike Stern was with him, a guitar player, great guitar player. But as it turns out, he said, man, we're having this rehearsal, and Mike's just playing, man. He's playing like 350,000 notes a minute, man. And I said to him, man, I'm going to send you to Notes Anonymous. And it was I mean, how else can you tell a guy he's playing too much?
Right.
He was just a lovely cat to work with, and I got him together with Marcus Miller. Now Marcus had been in his band,
Right.
but Marcus I'd been doing a lot of stuff with Marcus, with David Sanborn and Joe Sample, and Marcus is really a good writer. He writes very
The hell of a writer.
very melodic songs that stick in your head. And, so I told Miles, I said, look, man, we ought to do some stuff with Marcus, because his writing is just great. And he said, oh yeah, Marcus, I love Marcus. So basically that's how it happened. I got Marcus, and we went into the studio, and the first thing we did was Tutu.
Yeah.
And
Which was also huge. That was his first recording for Warner Brothers.
Yeah, no, that did great. I think it was nominated for a Grammy. I don't know if it won. I don't think it won.
Yeah. There were two people, when Miles' autobiography came out, which I believe was in 88 or 89, something like that, maybe 89. As I know you are aware of, when the inlet there where it has all of the photos of his favorite artists and people through the years, your picture was in there. And that's when I really started becoming, because Miles Davis, whatever he says, that's gospel, especially to some young teenagers, like, whatever Miles says listen to, that's what we're going to listen to. Whatever Miles says wear, if we can afford it, that's what we'll wear, I learned about Issei Miyake from Miles, like, who is that?
That's right.
Still don't own any, but I know who he is, But I remember he said, there was a picture of you in there, and it said, Tommy LiPuma, he's a great producer to work with because he thinks like an artist. Wow. And I always remembered that when I finally got a chance to meet you. Actually, there's a couple other things I wanted to talk to you about before we open up the floor, but you are really going to get a big kick out of this. Please tell us some tidbits about Anita Baker.
Anita's probably, as everyone in here I'm sure knows, one of the great singers of our time. She's just got magical chops, but she's a piece of work. And I just think it's like it's definitely in the clinical area, so you just couldn't. There was no way of having any sort of control whatsoever. And it took us 1.5 years to do this album. And we were doing it everywhere. We were doing it in her house, because she didn't want to, in a house that she owned that was empty. And she had moved to this other house, but she still had this house. So she said, let's set up a studio in the house, which was just a terrible idea. But anyway, and you know, we just kept going on and on and on and on and on and on. And finally, a year and a half goes by, and I finally deliver the album, and I wasn't happy with it, and so I get a call from Bob Krasnow, and he said, he just zeroed in on one tune. He said, hey, you know, this tune sounds like maybe there's something we can do with it, but it sounds kind of empty. It doesn't. I said, look, Bob, I've been trying to convince her to put these, you know, I had a guitar part that, you know, somebody had been playing that I thought made sense, and she didn't want a guitar on it. He said, just sit right where you sit. Now, meanwhile, I'm in Connecticut. At the time, I had a home up in Connecticut, a weekend place. So I was up there. 10 minutes later, he calls me back. He said, Anita's waiting to hear from you. I said, oh, man. So I call, and everybody was, oh, yeah, it's great. Yeah, fine, let's do it. Great. You know, so I book plane, go out to L.A., get the guitar player. You know, I remind him of the part. We put the part on, and then I had to remix it. So as I'm remixing, the receptionist from this, we were working at Conway recording in LA. The receptionist comes in and she said, Tommy, she said, there's some guys here from West Coast Detectives. And they've come to pick up the tape, the Anita Baker tapes. And I said, they come to pick up the Anita Baker tapes. West Coast Detectives. I said, well, look, you tell West Coast Detectives to call their client and tell them that these tapes don't belong to her. They belong to Elektra. So I called her manager, who's Sherwin Bash at the time. I said, Sherwin, what the fuck is going on here, man? This is like, you know, from out of nowhere. He said, look, no, you know, let me call her up. So he calls her up, and she just completely changed the story around. Oh yeah, well no, I was thinking about hiring this detective agency when we go on the road, and I just wanted to see what they were like and was trying them out.
So she sends them to you.
Well, I think it was all bullshit, you know. It's just like so. That, you know, that was it as far as I'm concerned. I ran into her once, and we were very nice to one another.
Yeah.
But it's really unfortunate because, like, here's an artist who is just multi-talented,
Sure.
you know, and you know, it's really unfortunate. In fact, the amazing thing is, some years later, she got a Bruce Lundvall, who I forewarned, but you know, he signed her anyway. But she sold 600,000 or 700,000 albums. She hadn't had an album out in 10 years, 15 years.
Yeah. I can remember this one story. I think it's safe to tell, but I may have to rap to you about editing this out of the video. But no, it's cool. It's cool. Hopefully, none of us will be here by the time you know the main person in the story knows about it. But George Duke told me this great story about Anita, because he worked with Anita a lot, and there's this great story about when Anita was in her retirement, quote unquote. There was a Japanese promoter called George Duke and said, listen, I want you to bring your trio. We just need a trio. And Anita will pay you $400,000 for a 1 hour set. So George Duke said, hell yeah, we'll be there. You know? So, you know, just one night. So he calls Anita and says, Anita, look, let's go make this money, man. You know, we just got to go one night and that's it. You know, 400 grand. Well, George, you know, I'm not really taking gigs now, and you know, I want to stay home with the kids. And George said, are you kidding? You know, we leave Thursday, get there Friday, play Saturday, you'll be home Sunday. You know, just get a babysitter. Well, no, I'm not really taking any gigs now, George. I'm sorry, I don't want to do it. Just said, oh. He calls the promoter back, says, look, you know, Anita's really not doing any work right now. You know, she feels uncomfortable. You know, she hasn't been on the road in a while. She doesn't want to do it. He said, okay, well, how about I up it to 600,000? He said, I'll call you back. So he calls Anita and says, look, Anita, look, man. The dude upped it to 600 grand just for a 1 hour set. 1 hour set. Said, look, you take $500,000, I'll take 100 grand. You know, you take whatever you want. That's take home pocket money. Nah, George, I don't think I want to do the gig. And George said he's just like, you know, he's got a knife to his throat at this point, like, you gotta be kidding me. Calls the guy back, and the guy says, okay, look, this is my third and final offer. I'll give you $750,000. She never took the gig.
Yeah.
And George Duke was just like, you gotta be kidding me. I'm gonna call like a circus company and get a lookalike, you know, to go to Japan and make the gig. But yeah, George, he's still burned by that. It's like 750 grand for a 1 hour gig. You know, it's like a little private corporate gig or something.
Yeah.
You know?
No. There's no rhyme, no reason.
Which was one of George's big hits.
Yeah. Oh, that's right.
There you go. But actually, before we open up the floors, two more quick things I want to ask you about. Because I happen to be on her debut recording for GRP, and that's Diana Krall. In 1994, I can remember we both were being managed by Marianne Topper. And Marianne says, Christian, you got to hear this girl, Diana Krall. And I'd already known Diana. I didn't know her that well, but I certainly knew who she was, and we hung out a little bit and talked some music because I knew she had spent time with Ray Brown and Jimmy Rolls and people like that. What was it about Diana Krall that turned you on so much?
Well, look, I always think it's so important for an artist to have a style. You know, for you to, like, when the minute she opens her mouth and sings, you know it's her. There's no question of the fact. You know, I mean, if you have any sense, if you've heard her once, for the most part, I would say, majority of the times you're going to say, that's Diana Krall.
You know her sound.
She's got a sound, she's got a style, and she's one of the most talented individuals I've ever had the pleasure of working with. But the funny thing is, when I first heard her, she had done an album for this small record company in Canada called Just in Time Records, and I had just taken over, the company, and as it turns out, they had signed her, or they were close to signing her. Whatever it was, But one of the first meetings I had with Carl and with Carl Griffin and Larry, they pulled a CD out, and they said, "There's this girl that either we sign or we're thinking about signing," and they put this record on, and it sounded like a Holiday Inn. It sounded like someone playing piano and singing at the Holiday Inn.
Right.
Man. It just didn't hit me. Well,
Which is what she did for a long time.
yeah, right.
Yeah.
But thank God, because I sort of said, I don't know, man. I'm not. It didn't really get to me. Thank God they had a video that she had done. She had done a solo piano thing for the BET network. And so they said, well, we've got this video, let me put this on. Well, it was just her singing and playing the piano. It knocked me right off my chair. I said, shit, wait a minute, this girl's got it, And which you didn't, I couldn't tell from that record.
Right.
And that happens a lot of times, One reason why is very important. Whether it's good or it's bad, or if I feel that there's if there's anything there with an artist, you must see the artist live.
Yeah.
You've got to see an artist live to really get a sense as to whether or not, they have the goods or not.
Well, it's funny you would say that because Loren and I, as you well know, we worked together also at Jazz Aspen for the summer educational program. And one question that you always get all the time is, how do we get particularly from vocalists, how do we get a producer, and Loren and I almost always, actually, I think most people who we know say this, don't give them a CD, because you got to realize somebody, like most producers, especially popular producers, they have a whole separate house full of CDs that people have given them.
Yeah, exactly.
And there's no human way possible to listen to all that music. But like you said, live is the best way.
It definitely is. I mean, even if somebody sends me something and I listen to it and I like it, I still have to see,
Right.
I have to see them live. But in Diana's sense, and this is interesting because you were there for it. You were there not only for the first record, which was direct to 2-track. We recorded directly to a 2-track, and she was great. And then the album, it was a Benny Carter.
Only Trust Your Heart.
Only Trust Your Heart. And but the real breakthrough came when we did this disastrous album for GRP, which was the person who was a GM at the time convinced me to do, which was, I didn't do all of it, but convinced me of the concept, which was, it was the 25th anniversary of the Beatles. And we're going to do this thing. Everybody on the label will do their little bit, right? So I came up with the idea of her doing and I Love Him, but And I Love Her was the name of the tune, but she did it and I Love Him. So we went into that small studio at Sony.
Yeah.
That back studio, right?
That was on that compilation.
Yeah, it was a compilation.
That was the breakthrough?
I think it was a breakthrough because what happened was when we did direct to 2-track, it was just like, hey, boom, bam, bam, it was, just did it. And that was my only experience with her in the studio, was that one thing. And then what happened was, this was the first time where we went in and it was you and Louis Nash and her.
Exactly.
In that little room.
Yeah.
And, but we really shed, we did some woodshed. Woodshedding. Until it started feeling right.
Yeah.
And then next thing you know, just going through what form it should be and all that stuff. So maybe about 45 minutes later, she dropped this unbelievable performance.
Yeah.
Just incredible. And I remember I said, baby, you got to listen to this. And she said, really? I said, check this out. And I remember we went into the booth and played it back, and I could remember, I saw the look on her face. It was like, not only did she get it that the take was great, but it was the whole transition of how we did it and how we got to that place. That suddenly she said, wait a minute, now I think it just sort of hit her what the possibilities were. And then the next album, which you were also on, was Love Scenes.
Love Scenes, right.
And that was really the breakthrough album. That was one that had
how
Peel Me a
popular
Grape.
that was. Right. I remember we played at the Algonquin, and I didn't play the whole, I think she did a month there, and I played 1 week with her out of that month, and I remember the guy who ran the place was like, sir, can you move out of Diana's way? Talking to me. I said, well, what do you mean move out of her way? I'm in the band. I'm standing behind her. He said, yeah, but can you stand further back? I said, nowhere else to go. So I had to turn, it was so uncomfortable. I had to turn and play this way so the people sitting here could see Diana. So I'm turning this way and I'm playing like this for the whole week.
Oh my God, I didn't know that.
And I looked at Diana and I said, you really better be lucky I like it.
Well, I almost forgot that because what happened was we did that thing at Sony.
Yeah.
And actually the next album was All for You. It was the thing she did, the Nat Cole.
Yeah.
That was the next album,
Right,
which
right.
you weren't on. It was
I
the
wouldn't.
band.
Yeah, that was her regular band.
Yeah, with Russell
Right.
and I can't remember.
Paul Keller.
Paul Keller.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then the next album,
That was the first
I insisted
orchestral record, right?
Sorry, no, the one after that was When I Look in Your Eyes.
Yes. Finally, before we open it up for the audience, you do one thing that I still have never seen another producer do, and you sit out in the room with the musicians, and you don't understand how unusual that is, because most producers sit behind the booth with the engineer. They sit next to the engineer and they're listening and doing whatever, but Tommy always sits in the room with the musicians. And I remember we did that Sanborn record. You had a seat next to Mandel.
Next to
He's
Mandel.
up on the podium, and you had your headphones on. And I remember Johnny said, okay, let's get ready to roll take one. And I was in my bass booth going, well, Tommy better hurry up and get inside before they start rolling. I'm like, wait a minute, Tommy has to, and I just couldn't believe it. What's your concept behind that? I think it was great, but
Well,
no one else does
it happened because I had a problem with the talkback switch and the glass between me and the players. Because, like, you know, you would do a take and they go, what do you think? And I hit that button and it was just a silence. And it just, I was intimidated by that button. And it was always a hindrance for me. And then one time, we were working on something, and I kept trying to get it across. I said, man, so I said to Al, I said, look, Al, do me a favor. Ask the second to put a pair of earphones and put a music stand out there so I could put my music. I put the music on the stand, so I could just be right there and I could talk to them. So that's what we did. We went. They set up, and then suddenly I said, well, wait a minute, man, this is
cool.
I'm so much more comfortable here.
Right.
And you know, I could just say immediately how I feel. I don't have to, like, you know, what do you think? What did you think of that? And hit the button, and I could get a sense, and also the musicians get a sense as to when I'm responding to a take.
Right. And you
I
can
know-
feel the energy, the instantaneous energy,
man,
because it's different when you hear it in the.
Absolutely.
Right.
It's just not there. And then on top of it, the other thing I can never understand is that, like, when you're in the booth, there's so many distractions.
Right.
You know, phone ringing, man, people talking and shit going on, you know, that, like, I just don't understand it. It's like, you know, it's just, and I would get distracted. I couldn't, I got a little ADD as it is, you know. So it just was very distracting. So, and I could remember, one time, just once, I won't even say who it is, artist and the co-producer who the artist insisted on having on this date, didn't want me out there. And but with the exception of that, I've never had a problem
I
with
think I
anybody.
know who that was too.
Yeah, it started with an L and ended with a W.
I'll leave that alone. Let's take a few questions for the great Tommy LiPuma.
I have a question. Do you feel a difference when you produce a jazz album versus a pop album? And what is the difference, do you feel, when you're in the studio producing this?
Well, it's been a long time since I've done straight pop stuff, but the big difference is that, like, a lot of, you know, when you do pop records, you may have somebody doing a scratch vocal, but a lot of times you're just doing the track, and you're just really listening.
The main person isn't there.
The main person isn't there, or the main person is sitting in the booth listening to the track, and then, you know, they put their voice on after the fact. It's just a bit more, you know, with a jazz record or a jazz influenced record, it's more.
It's more real.
It's just it's what's happening at the moment.
Yeah. Now, you produced Gladys Knight's
Yeah.
last Verve record, correct?
Yeah. Well, I produced half of it. Yeah,
Right,
the other half
right.
Ron Farah did. But
She wouldn't record live, right?
I did everything I possibly could to get her to sing live because this
She
woman
still sounds
could
great, yeah.
sing, man. She could sing. And I just thought it was a natural,
Yeah.
to do it with the band. I said, look, Gladys, even if we don't use it,
Just come.
you'll inspire the players.
Right.
It's just a question of being able to get, it's like, the players hear somebody sing. I'm going to give you a good example of this in a second. Players hear who's singing, and they get inspired, and then obviously the artist gets inspired. It's like, it's a whole thing. That's one of the reasons why you get takes that feel, real and
Right,
natural, and you get
right.
that magic happening, other than just sitting there doing, to
Playing.
tell you the truth, what I ended up doing with the Gladys things is I hired a singer. I hired a singer to come in and sing the tunes,
Just to get some.
just to get
yeah.
just so they could get a sense as to what the tune was about, and but I tell you, man, see, because I think it has to do with she was so accustomed to that Motown thing, which was basically that's how they made
Right.
these records, that she had it down. She would walk in there, scope out the track, get a sense as to what it was all about. She would try a few, and then she said, "Okay, let's go."
And nail
Boy,
it.
man,
Yeah.
within a couple of takes, she had it.
Yeah.
I can't see,
Over there,
so.
yeah.
Oh,
Stand up if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah. Can you speak to the future a little bit, or where you see it going in terms of the internet,
uh-huh.
downloading, the effect that's having on.
I could be the wrong person to talk to on this because I wish I had more hope as to where it's going. Look, it's going to ultimately end up. Things always end up some way or other on their feet, But this is the lowest spot that I've ever seen the music business, the record business. There is no record business. I mean, there are no record stores. I mean, it's so, and it hasn't like it's caught. The thing that's so amazing about this, and I can't quite figure out what this is about, that the less sales, like 2 weeks ago, SoundScan, which is this company that basically tracks how many records sold, the SoundScan figure for 2 weeks ago, and I can't remember who the record.
Cake.
Who?
Cake.
Kate.
It's the band Cake.
44,000. 44,000 for a #1 record.
Wow.
Now let me tell you something. In the days, let's say 1990.
1 week? That's 1 week?
1 week. In 1990, if you had a #1 record and you sold less than 700,000 or 800,000 in a week, there was something wrong.
Right.
So you could see where it's gone. And the point I'm trying to make is what's so weird is that to see, how much more sales you're seeing on the internet, it's just a few percentage points.
Right.
So so obviously, man, people are still stealing this shit,
Yeah.
Right.
and they haven't, they got to figure this out. They got to figure out how could people get paid for what they do, what they do for a living.
Yeah.
And the other problem is that now you've got a whole generation of people that have been brought up to sort of take this as a norm,
Right.
and that's the dangerous part of it.
Upcoming generation.
Yeah, like as
Why
far
should we pay for music? Right.
pay for music. I never paid for music.
Right.
So I honestly don't know where it's going. I would hope that I mean, listen, there's not as many. It's like, look, back in the days when jazz was in its heyday, and I was a total nut, bebop freak. There were 15 great tenor saxophone players. There were like, I mean, there was just one great player after another. And there was a moment, you know. Now, I'm not saying that there aren't great musicians today, because there are. Because what, you know, as a proof that's sitting right next to me. And there's, you know, a lot of great players. The thing that seems to be missing, that I notice, is, again, getting back to this style thing. Like, you know, when you heard Zoot Sims band, you knew it was Zoot Sims, you know. When you heard, I mean, even, you know, if you were enough of a fan, you know, you knew when it was Al Cohn. You knew who the players were. It's Clifford Brown, man. I'd hear two notes, man. I knew it was Clifford Brown. He did bust me once, man, because I didn't know he was playing a Freddie Hubbard, man. I said, "Who is that?" He said,
No,
Man.
no. I didn't do that.
I'm sorry. I dropped
No,
this.
because it was an obscure Freddie Hubbard
Yeah,
thing.
yeah. Because I couldn't, but it was funny because, like, Freddie had such a, I mean, please, man. I got a great Freddie Hubbard story. First time I asked Freddie Hubbard on a date. I was doing this.
Date?
Yeah. And we were doing this Giro thing, and we said it'd be nice to have a player. And I said, well, you know, Freddie Hubbard. Why don't we get Freddie Hubbard to play on it? So I got his number. I called him. He was living in L.A. at the time, and so I said, Freddie, I had this thing, you know, Al Giro, and he said, yeah. He said, well, you know, what are you paying? I said, well, you know, what do you want? He said, $2,000. I said, okay. And there was this silence, this short silence, and he said, man, did I sell myself short? But, you know, again, man, I tend to get off the scope. I'm talking about, like, you know, it's so important for artists to find their own voice, no matter whether they, you know, sing or play or whatever. Yeah. They got to find their own voice. And you know, you got, and again, in the pop area, you've got, you know, people like Amy Winehouse, and there are a few people that, yeah, they got the goods, but it's not as many. Like in the 60s and early 70s, I mean, there were like just one group, one artist after another. There was just so many.
What do you contribute that to?
I think what happens is just like, I mean, in jazz, it was like, you know, like maybe from the late 20s through the 50s. Mm-hmm. It was just like, it was the golden time, you know? And then suddenly, you know, whether it was when, you know, the rock and roll thing started, and then by the 60s, I think it got to a point where suddenly people weren't.
You can just leave that. Yeah, there you go.
Suddenly people weren't as interested. I mean, when I was growing up, jazz was the pop music. I mean, you know, jukeboxes, man. That was it, man. The first time I heard Charlie Parker, I was at Don King, the Don King. This is before he was running the Boxers. He was running numbers.
Right.
In Cleveland.
And he had a club, right?
He had a club called the Corner Tavern on 79th and Cedar, and I used to sit in with this great organ trio, and you know, the jukebox was just, man, there was such great things on the jukebox. So I, you know, took a break and I went to the bar to have a drink, and next thing I know, somebody, you know, put a nickel or a dime, whatever it was at that time, and I heard the most insane introduction in my life ever. It was the introduction to Just Friends, where he played this outrageous thing before he played Letter A, man. I remember that.
Of course.
And I went, who is that? So it's like, you know, it was a combination of radio. When I was 9 years old, I came down with this illness, and I was laid up in bed for 2 years. But I had a radio at my side, and the radio was my friend. And that's how I found R&B. Well, it wasn't called R&B at the time, but I just happened to, it was WJMO, which was the R&B station.
Was that Alan Freed?
Alan Freed actually, no, he was on WJMO, and he had this great
He
show.
was the cat,
it was the
right?
Moondog.
Yeah.
He had the Moondog, yeah. And his theme song was Blues for the Red Boy, which was, I can't remember the name of the group. They were from Detroit. Ba 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 baby, baby. You know, and you'd hear, first of all, he'd start with this wolf howling, you know? And then bam, you'd hear that.
Even
that opening.
DJs had more personality
Oh
back
man,
then, huh?
personality. He would sell. There was this beer called Aaron Brew in Cleveland. Well, he would do this commercial. As it turns out, I got to know Alan. We became really good friends, and I asked him about this later. He would do a commercial where he would talk about. You'd hear him pop the cap, pour the beer into the glass,
Yeah.
and then you'd hear him gulping. He'd actually be drinking it.
Yeah.
You know, you go, Aaron Brew. But they were just, you know, personalities, and also, man, they really knew great records, great songs. Like, you know, I used to, when I was 9 or 10, I was listening to Big Maybelle and Ruth Brown, and it was just you know, radio was just the center of my universe.
Yeah.
So now it does, you know, it's not the same. Now you got Sirius, which is not serious at all, as far as I'm concerned. But
Yeah. Over here.
Tommy?
Yes, you.
oh,
I'm
oh,
sorry.
Alan, yes.
Obviously, you are very active and you work a lot. Can you tell us about any side project that you're working on?
I'm actually, there's been a lot of pre-production to nowhere in the last year or so. You know, I had a Sting album that we were supposed to do, and now it's been postponed, I understand. But I know it's postponed, but until the spring. I'm not sure what's going on with that. I'm, you know, I've been talking to. I actually shouldn't go
t-
beyond that.
yeah,
So
yeah, yeah.
you know, but few things that I'm in the process of talking about, you know, artists with. But you know, fortunately, I'm in a position in my life where I'm able to work on just what I want to work on.
Yeah.
And it's not even just a question of the money at this point. It's a question of whether or not I'm going to enjoy the experience.
Yeah.
Now, we were talking about, you know, people who can just lay down a performance. Christian was on this date with Joe Sample. It was Joe Sample and Randy Crawford. We did 15 things in 3 days,
Yep.
right? 15 things in 3 days, and they were all live vocals.
Yeah. And
Was
all-
that
and-
an experience?
And
of
all happening.
all happened.
Yeah. Yeah.
That was one of the great. I mean, I hadn't experienced anything like that
Yeah,
in years, where
yeah.
where an artist just got up. Well, Diana is does live stuff. She overdubs things also, but she does a lot of live stuff.
Yeah. I think Natalie did mostly live stuff
Natalie,
too. Yeah.
well, she would sing live,
Oh.
but she would always want to redo them.
Oh. See,
Well,
I
she-
didn't know that part.
Yeah, she always wanted to, you know, redo
Her,
them.
her live tracks were burning.
Just great, man. I mean, she's, you know, look, she is definitely one of the best,
Oh, yeah.
one of the great singers of our time.
Yes. Absolutely.
And I don't care what you throw at her, man. I mean, it doesn't
Right.
it can be pop, R&B.
Jazz,
she just
whatever.
she just nails it.
Yeah.
There's no one like her.
She's incredible. Question in the back, all the way in the back.
Your relationship to Danny Styles?
To Danny Styles,
Yes.
man, you know, it could be my age, man, but I can't. None.
He's like you, but he's older.
Oh yeah.
Really.
Well,
Like you, but older. That's-
oh, thank you.
There's a radio program every Saturday night from 8 to 10 on 8:20 a.m.
Oh, that's great to hear.
As a matter of fact, he used to be, one of his nicknames was the Moondog, and so he's been a disc jockey for like 75 years, and he plays vinyl and he plays from the 20s right up to
No kidding, man.
50s and 60s.
Danny Styles. Well,
So
thank you.
he's
Well,
a treasure.
Yeah, that's like Hal Jackson. Hal Jackson's
Yeah.
still with
Jackson.
us too.
Past Hal Jackson.
Yeah, He's
past Hal Jackson.
Well, he must be 100, because Hal Jackson's just turned 95.
No kidding.
Oh, he's
man.
Yeah.
Italian.
Oh, I got you. Got you. We had a question up here. Yes.
Yes.
You're on.
I wanted to first say thank you so much for your time and sharing these stories. I'm a new vocalist, and I just always relish opportunities to listen to you share your history with us, because it really, it makes it easier for us to enter into the business with a certain kind of understanding. My question is, what do you think is the future of jazz music as it's finding its way in other cultures? They're incorporating more jazz themes. Do you think that, what do you think the future of jazz music will be?
First of all, as far as other cultures, I think they're, for some reason or other, the other cultures seem to appreciate it more than where it was originated. I have no doubt that this music is going to be, this genre of music is going to be around a lot longer than any of us sitting in this room. And I'm just hoping that it has the same, music has a way of like going through these, how should I put it? It's like sort of has the lows and the highs. And I think right now we're probably at a low point, and I'm sure at one point it's just going to take, another Charlie Parker, and I don't mean someone who sounds like Charlie Parker, but someone who's going to give people the same inspiration that Parker did, or Artem. When you stop to think about it, you had guys like I just got, there's this great new thing on that you can get on the computer. There's Jazz on the Tube. I don't know if anybody's aware of this. Great online thing. But they now have a new one called 20s Jazz. And I just got this this thing today of Earl Father Hines. Man, it's just it made me realize. Not that it's the first time I had ever heard Father Hines, but it made me realize how inspirational he was to Art Tatum, to Nat Cole. Yeah, exactly. Oscar Peterson. So it's like, it's just going to take somebody to come along to give people the sense of inspiration and whatever, and also musicians and artists who listen and get inspired, and next thing you know, the circle, starts moving again. Yeah. Yes.
Oh, okay. Hi. Thank you for coming and speaking with us. I just wanted to know who are some upcoming artists that you're listening to right now that we should be on the lookout for?
I tell you the truth, I really haven't, since I've sort of, I can't say I've retired, maybe semi-retired. I'm not as active in going out and looking like I was at one time. And it's with the exception of, like, let's say, people who will send me things, and but I'm not out looking like I was. There was a time when I was a hunter. I'm not as active, so I can't say, boom. This is. Are you talking about like vocalists or?
Mainly, but just in general, if there's anybody that you're listening to.
Well, I'll tell you, I heard someone that I just blew me off my seat a couple of weeks ago. Her name is Melissa Walker, and she's married to someone very close to me here. I don't. Is that Melissa? Is that record available?
Yes, it is.
Well,
In the middle of it all, we hope so. Somewhere.
Well, get a copy of that. That's definitely something you should check out.
All the way in the back there.
Moi? Tommy, thank you for coming and sharing. If we can hop back a few paces, you had talked about there's no A&D, there's no artist development anymore. But how do you, any ideas on how to combat that in this day and age? You have Diana Krall, who was developed over 6, 7, 8 years. You've got Diane Reeves, who was incubated at Blue Note. You've got Cassandra Wilson that was incubated at Blue Note. There appears to be, and I hate to say it, this forgotten 40, forgotten 50 category, because the industry is so short-sighted. They're always looking for the youngest, smartest, fastest, quick draw, whatever, or they're looking for the living legends. And there's a plethora of musicians and veterans that are in that category that don't see the light of day. Now, without having that artist development mindset or ability anymore, what are your thoughts?
You have to have a tough skin. You gotta just, if you believe in yourself, you just have to persevere. And you know, there are a few independent labels. I'm trying to think. I just went blank on the label that Betty LaVette is on. It's an indie label. I can't remember the name of the label, unfortunately. But if you get a Betty LaVette album, she's great. I don't know if
Still
anyone has
doing
heard outrageously great.
Yeah.
But that record label she's on is I understand from everything that I've heard, the guy who owns it is a very development conscious guy. And he's been, he's put out several records by Betty. And I think it's only the last record, this Interpretations album that she did of all of these English things, that is really, she's probably sold, I don't know, 80 or 90,000, that's worldwide, but still in this day and age, that's pretty damn good. So, there are a few indie labels out there that are entrepreneurs, guys that just love music, and they're out there fighting the big guys, But the big guys are having a problem too, man. It's not like they're beating up the world by any means.
So now, what are your thoughts? Thank you for that. What are your thoughts? I'll sit down a second. What are your thoughts on the indie label versus the self-produced CD?
Well, the self-produced CD is fine for being able to, put your goods out there and people getting a chance to listen to it and get, for you to hear it if it's made well, and if it gives what you do the best, if you're shown in the best light, like I was saying earlier, I heard that if it would have been that first album that Diana made, I probably would have passed on her, and that would have been a giant mistake. But the point is, you can't, CDs may work and they may not work. But it's like, I'm telling you, you just have to go out and find, go to clubs, just ask to get up and sing, and just, take Betty LaVette. Now, Betty LaVette has been around since the 60s. And believe it or not, she was just gigging, she wasn't really doing that much. She did just by accident. Somebody heard her album, one of the early albums she did. I got a lot of hell to raise or something like that, I think was the title. Anyway, it was the guy who was putting the talent together for the Kennedy Awards. And he said, man, this woman is great. Why don't we have her do something, right? They got her to sing one of the Who was being honored at the Kennedy Centers. She got up and she sang one of those songs, and it was like, that was it. That started the ball rolling. But you never know what it's going to be. And say, are there any key things you could do?
Right.
Man, just keep putting your name out there, trying to get gigs trying to sit in where people start talking about you. And if you got the goods, you know, that's really it. I mean, as far as the, you know, putting your CD out on your own and selling it over the internet, you and 3 million other people.
Yeah, I think that's the problem with there's so much the internet, you know, it's information overload. Forget the superhighway, there's just too much out there.
Yeah, it's not an easy time. You know, there used to be a very specific way of doing it. You'd try to get signed by, that was the most difficult thing, getting signed, well, not the most difficult thing, but one of the most difficult things, getting signed by an act, by a record company. The record company, if they had any belief in you, they'd put up the money, you know, make the record, try to get it played on the air. But that was the other thing. You had radio then. So, you know, if it had anything going for it, if people heard it, they'd go out and buy it. Next thing you know, the retail store would call up the distributor and they'd say, "Hey, what's this? What is this so and so?" And
now they just steal it if they like.
Now they just steal it. Yeah.
BitTorrent.
Thank you.
All right.
Yes.
When you're at home listening to music on your own, do you listen to CDs or vinyl?
I listen to vinyl because, you know, I've got vinyl. I don't listen to it all the time. And believe it or not, I've got most of my collection now I had transferred to my computer. And the reason why I use my computer a lot is because I'm able to go from one act or one artist to another like that, you know? And it's so great, instead of like having to get up, take the CD off, find the other one, and where's the other one, and I'm looking for it, and you know, it's you know, that's one of the things that's made it easy. It doesn't, you know, you're looking for sound quality.
Right.
It's not the best, but I love it because, you know, I can go from Duke Ellington to, I mean, anything I want. It's right at my fingertips, you know?
Yeah. I think we have time for one more before we call it a night.
Okay. Okay, right, yeah, right there. No, you. Yeah.
3 quick comments and a question. One, Danny Styles is where I first heard Cats in the Fiddle, which was a big
Wow,
move in the
I Miss You So, man.
I Miss You
You know, that's
So.
the first goddamn record I ever bought.
When I heard that, it knocked me out, and it's just such a great record. And I saw them. They did The Duke is Tops, Lena Horne's first movie.
Huh.
They're in that. It's a small
No kidding.
segment, and they do like laying on the bass and playing it, laying down.
Yeah.
I mean, they did all
Well,
that kind of good
you know,
stuff.
you could find them now they're on online.
Well, I
you could,
have the CD.
you could,
I wouldn't have got the CD based on hearing.
you could just look. You know, go to iTunes and hit Cats in the Fiddle, and you know, 1 or 2 albums come up. Yeah.
It's just a great foundational group. The second comment, you were talking about cultures of loving jazz. Benny Carter played Earl Father Hines. Christian played Billy Eckstine with Motown, and he was just playing that, and I picked up Billy's voice, but the song he was playing sounded so bluesy, and I'm thinking when he was with Earl Father Hines, he wrote Jelly, Jelly, Jelly,
Right.
which
Wow.
is a straight blues song.
Right.
Now my question is this, in terms, you mentioned the singers, and back in the day, like Ruth Brown was the woman with the teardrop in her voice. And you know, and she wore the dresses she was famous for, the crinoline skirt,
Yep.
and the dress and the shoes matched. So I'm saying that to say back then there were a lot of great artists, but what separated was the publicity or how they were able to market themselves. So
And a
Ruth
lot of
Brown
that,
was
listen,
here.
a lot of these artists had that was part of the style. In other words, that was all part of their
style. It's
their
how you
thing.
market the style.
Yeah, it's like, you know, like I just got So Long. Have you heard So Long by Ruth Brown?
But Ruth, I
Just-
got a question. Have you heard Ruth Brown 65?
No.
What she did in 1965?
No,
I
no.
took that to Vietnam with me, and she sings on the Good Ship Lollipop, the
Uh-huh.
temple song, slow and bluesy. And when she sings Happy Landing on the Chocolate Bar, that is the greatest line in the world.
That's good. Well, two things I want to tout you on. Two things I want to tout you on. One is Big Maybelle singing "Say It Isn't So," which you can get online. Just an amazing performance. And the other one is, and I was first introduced to this woman in the early '60s by this friend of mine, Abe Cash, Little Miss Cornshucks. Now I'm telling you, this girl could sing, and she was on. She did one record. She did a couple of records, but she did one record with Chess, in the late '50s, early '60s. Check this girl out. She was fantastic. Same. She was in the sort of like the Ruth Brown, Dinah place. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Before we call it a night and say another official thank you to Tommy, I wanted you all to say hello to a wonderful musician, dear friend of ours, great pianist and composer, worked with Cannonball Adderley for last part of his career, Nancy Wilson, Art Farmer, Benny Golson, Jazz Tet, led many of his own groups, and for years was the musical director on the Arsenio Hall show. Michael Wolff is in the audience tonight.
Oh.
So I want to extend a big thank you to you, Tommy, for joining us. For those of you who don't know, Tommy is also one of our board members for the National Jazz Museum in Harlem. So a lot of things that go on here, this man helps make it happen. Thank you for all your wisdom and stories and entertainment, and I love you. You got that hood in you, man. and I for my 2 cent comment for tonight, I think that's what's missing in jazz nowadays. No, nobody likes the hood part anymore. Yeah. You know. That's why Roy Hargrove is my man through thick and thin.
And I'll tell you the other thing. If you think back, probably one of the last entertainment was a big part of what was happening, and like as you think about it, the last entertainer was Dizzy Gillespie.
Yep. Yep.
Dizzy was probably the last cat that didn't take it all too seriously, and.
I agree with you on that. Dizzy's a hell of an entertainer.
Yeah.
Yes. And on that note, ladies and gentlemen, we want you to once again remind you that no coins. We want you to leave dollar bills, greenbacks, dollar bills. Speaking of Jerry Wexler, on your way out.
The $50 handshake they used to call.
And we thank you all for coming out, and we will see you again very, very soon.
Yeah, great. Whoops, sorry.
Next Tuesday we start Jazz on Film. And we'll be doing Lester Young, Coleman Hawkins, Sonny Rollins, John Coltrane. So we'll do a whole month, that's February, of Jazz on Film. So come on by. If you need schedules, we got them here. Sign in if you haven't signed in. Got membership forms.